Y'all know Gil, so you know who was speaking. There wasn't no speaking over anybody. But I second what he said in that, you meet people and you feel like you know them right away. And there's a connection that you have when you meet somebody in the spirit versus just meeting somebody. And I got to tell you, I am so encouraged tonight by what you guys are doing here at Kingsland. I go to Celebration Church in Georgetown. I'm an elder there, and you guys are kicking our butts in men's ministry. We had about 6,000 men, or 6,000 people in our church about 10 years ago, and my pastor, Joe Champion, who's an awesome guy, played football at LSU, Alabama, Mississippi State, all you guys. Great dude. And I went to him and I said, Joe, if we're going to have a strong church, and we were set to grow, and I said, if we're going to have a strong church, we got to get the men right. And I said, you want to build a new building? We had the land. I'm like, you won't have to do any kind of pledge drive. If you'll get the men right and you'll help the men get healthy, then you won't have to ever have a pledge drive. Right now they say that about 20% of the families tithe. But if you get the men right, I'm sure it would be like 80%. And that's part of our spiritual discipline. And so anyway, he said, that's awesome, Drew. I think you're right. You're in charge. And I was like, okay, thanks. But it's encouraging to see what you guys are doing here in Austin. Man, that was such a powerful video and really shows the importance of the man in the home. And I get really fired up, so I'm going to try and calm down a little bit. But I get fired up when I get in a situation like this where there's a bunch of godly men interacting with other godly men, because that's what we got to have. And you guys have all the resources here to get involved with other men. And yes, Sunday mornings are great, prayer times are great, but I really have found, and I'm 60, almost 61 years old, and I've been a believer since I was 13, and I would say a Christian since I was about 25, because there is a difference between believing in God and being a follower of Christ. And getting connected with men is what got me there. And so you have the resources here. So if you're not connected, get connected. The Bible says in Proverbs 27:17 that as iron sharpens iron, as one man sharpens another. And it's so true. And if you know anything about how swords are made, there's two really important factors in making a battle-ready sword. One is you have to grind it, all right? Both sides to get that point sharp. But when you do, then there's all kinds of stuff on the blade. And so you have to polish it in order for it to be battle ready. Well, that's the same with us. And so sometimes we got to grind on us a little bit, and then we need that polishing too. And it's like I tell my clients when I sign them, I tell them I'm going to love you enough to give you a hug when you need a hug and kick you in the butt when you need a kick in the butt. And right? We all need that, right? We need both. We have to be encouraged, but we also need to be challenged. And so my hope tonight is that you guys leave here both challenged and encouraged. Because as you know, we're in a battle. We have an enemy. We have an adversary. 1 Peter 5:8 says, be alert, be aware, be on guard. Your adversary, the devil, is roaming about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may destroy. So we have an enemy. John 10:10 calls him a thief who's coming to kill, steal, and destroy. And he's coming to kill us, to destroy our families, to rob us of our kids. And it's our responsibility to not let that happen. Just like a football team prepares for their game on Sunday, I've had guys ask me, they're like, what do these guys do all week? Do they just run routes and throw passes and practice blocking and tackling? And I'm like, yeah, they do some of that, but the majority of the time is spent trying to figure out what the scheme of the other team is. So they're watching game film, and they're having meetings, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to defend themselves. And the Bible tells us that our enemy, Satan, is out there scheming against us. All right? In Ephesians 6, 1 through 11, it talks about the armor so that we can withstand the schemes of the enemy. 2 Corinthians 2:11 tells us to be aware and not be ignorant of the schemes of the enemy. And then Ephesians 4:11 through 14 tells us about God has given us everything that we need so that we won't be carried away, tossed to and fro. We can be mature men, full in Christ, so that we won't be fooled by the schemes of the enemy. And I believe that Satan has one major weapon that he uses against us, and it's deceit. He is a deceiver. God is a creator, and God's created many things for our good pleasure, but Satan deceives us. And in America, if something's good, a lot's better, right? And so he deceives us. And he even uses the things that God created for our good pleasure against us. And I believe, it's kind of like, have you ever seen a magic act? And the magician, I'll just break the news to you. There's no such thing as magic, all right? These guys cannot saw somebody in two and put them back together. What they do is they use a diversion, right? There's like a puff of smoke, or for guys, they have like a half-naked woman running around that's his assistant. Keep our eyes over here, and he's doing the trick over here. And I fully believe that that's what the enemy's doing in our lives. That's what he's doing in our world. And I believe, especially in the United States of America, that his plan has been from long ago to destroy our country from the home out. And he's getting our eyes on all these things, these other issues, and they're real, right? I mean, we got real stuff going on. Coming off a pandemic, there's, social injustice, there's political unrest. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, but that's over here, and it's getting us away from our homes. And we as men have to take control of our homes, and then we have to help other men. It's like Bobby said, sometimes it's like a chain. Sometimes you're the guy that somebody's reaching out to and helping and pulling up, and then another time you're the guy that's pulling somebody else up. And it's very important for us to be in both roles. And that's why it's so important to be in a group, and one of the guys said, to be with some guys that you can be real with. Because quite frankly, men, we're not great at sharing our feelings, right? I mean, I don't like it. But if you have a group of guys that you can be real with, it is so important to prepare us to do what God's got in store for us to do. And let me tell you something. He has created us exactly like we need to be in order to fulfill what he has for us to do in this world, on this earth. And so it's very important that we have other guys that can help us along the way, because we cannot do it by ourselves. The mission is to destroy the home. And as I was thinking about that one time, I was really, probably like some of you guys, when I got married, I was like, I want to be a great husband. I don't want to be good, I want to be great. I did not get a set of instructions from my pastor who married us that said, do these 10 things and you'll be a great husband. And when we had kids, I wanted to be a great dad. I didn't want to be good. I didn't want to be better than most. I wanted to be great. But my kid did not come with an owner's manual. And it's funny because I thought about it. I was telling my wife one time, somebody gave us this really fancy can opener. There was like a 25-page instruction manual for a can opener. And I'm like, we went to the hospital and we came back with a baby, with a kid. And we got no owner's manual. We had no idea what to do. I'll never forget, we drive home, we get home, I get the little carrier, I come in, I set him down on the couch, I look at him, and I look at my wife, I looked back at him, and I go, now what do we do? And when you think about it like that, that is nuts. And so we all try and figure it out as we go. So about 9 years ago, I'm sitting in my office. I live in Salado, Texas, about halfway between Waco and Austin, and we live out in the country, and we moved there from Dallas because we wanted to bring our kids up in a smaller community. And so we built our house, have our offices upstairs. My wife's self-employed also. And I'm up in my office, and it's about 6 o'clock, and I can hear them downstairs, Lane and Jake and Eli. And so I go, man, I got to wrap this up. And I start walking down the stairs. And I get to the landing. And I look through the living room into the kitchen. And Lane, my wife, is cooking dinner. And Jake and Eli are sitting at the counter. And it's one of those rare moments when they weren't punching each other. And they were all laughing. And I was overcome by a wave of emotion. And I literally had to sit down on the steps. And I looked at them. And I said, God, you've given me this beautiful, smart, awesome, godly woman, and these two really smart, awesome kids. And I'm like, I want to be great. You got to show me how to be great. You tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And so I went in, and we had a great evening, and the next morning, I got up like I usually do, and I went into my prayer time, and I'll read the word and pray, and I brought a legal pad. And I started writing down. I said, God, just if you'll show me what to do, I'll do it. And so over the course of a few months, I started writing some things down and some principles, and most of them, surprise, surprise, were things that I learned from sports and from my business. And I started implementing some of those things and started getting some good feedback from my family. And so I would do this like when I was traveling, wherever I went, I'd take my legal pad and I'd write things down. And one morning, I woke up in Nashville, Tennessee at the American Football Coaches Association convention. And I was praying and I was like, God, I really feel like I need a foundational principle. These things that you've given me have been really great, but I feel like there's something that I need that I can build these principles on. And so, as the other things, it didn't bolt of lightning, strike down, or, my phone rang and said, hey, Drew, this is God. So I went about my day, and I had some meetings with some of my coach clients, and I loved to go to that convention because I loved just to go listen to them talk football and listen to the great coaches speak. And that night, Nick Saban was speaking to the general session. And this is like at the convention, the big room. And there's 10,000 seats. And Nick Saban's coming up to speak to all these young coaches, old coaches, and I'm on the front row. And I love Coach Saban because I think he's really just a great leader. And I'm not an Alabama fan, but I just appreciate what he's done, because I don't know if y'all remember, Coach Saban was hired in 2007, but before that, he was at LSU, and he won a national championship. And then he spent 2 years at the Miami Dolphins. And then in 2007, man, Alabama, you remember, you probably hated it. Alabama was a mess. And Dennis Franchione had been there, and he came and he left, and there were some NCAA sanction issues, and then they brought in Mike Price, and Mike Price didn't even last long enough to coach a game, and he had some off the field issues, and it was just a mess. And they hired Mike Shula to come in, and he had played quarterback for him, and he's a great coach, and he's a great guy. Don Shula's son, it's Mike, right? And so he comes in, and he has an impossible task. So in 2007, they tapped Nick Saban to come in and be the head coach at Alabama. And Coach Saban was telling the story. He walks up to the podium in this big room, 10,000 people, and he says, the way we do it at our place is, and he went on to explain his culture. He calls it the process. And if you ever have a chance, whether you like Alabama or not, go look it up on their website. It's really great. But as he was talking to the AD said, do you think you can turn us around? And he said, I can turn it around. He said, but here's what I got to have. He said, number one, I got to have buy-in. And it starts with you. And he points at the AD. And he said, and it goes up to the president, and it goes all the way down to the guy who paints the stripes on the field on Saturdays. And he said, if everybody will buy in to the process, he said, we can turn this thing around. And he went on to tell all these coaches, he asked them the question, he said, do you have a culture? He said, no, seriously, do you have a culture? And he said, some of you think you don't have a culture and maybe you think you're trying to figure it out. He said, but I guarantee you have a culture. He said, the question is it the culture that you want? Is it intentional? And I was sitting there thinking, and I was like, a team is like a family. And every family has a culture. And the question is it intentional? Is it the culture that you want? And Coach Saban went on to tell them, and he said, if you think you don't have a culture, let me tell you something, you got a bad culture. Because you do have a culture, and if it's not what you're trying to make it, then it's not only do you have one, it's a bad one. So he went on to tell these guys that the other key ingredients to having a culture that not only survives but thrives is that you had to have it clearly defined. And then you had to have consistent communication of that culture. And then he said you have to have a system of accountability. And he said, for us, we've been doing this so long now, and this was his third year, and he had just won his first national championship there. And he said, for us, we've already got so much buy-in that he said the coaches don't even have to enforce the culture. He said the players do it. And so I started thinking about this, and I'm like, this is it. This is my foundational principle. And so I went home, and I was talking to Lane, my wife, and we came up with 4 things that we wanted to be what we were known for, the way we did it at our place. But we were like, okay, how do we get buy-in? How do we get our kids to buy in? Our kids were still pretty young. So we decided that like I said, we live out in the country, and we're going to take a walk. We did that from time to time. So we get the boys, and we go on a walk, and we're walking down the street, and I said, hey, guys, you know how we like to get together with all of our friends and have cookouts and play games, and kids get to run around and ride the four-wheelers and all that stuff? I go, what if we moved away from here? And a year later, all of our friends were getting together, and they were talking. Somebody said, hey, y'all remember the Pittmans? What would they say about us? And they're like, Jake, my oldest, goes, oh, well, they'd say I was the smartest. And, of course, Eli, the smart Alex, says, yeah, well, they'd say I was the best athlete. And I said, more importantly, what would we want them to say about us? They go, oh, boy, I don't know. And I go, well, would we want them to know that we were Christians, that we love Jesus? And they go, oh, yeah, for sure. But I'm sure they know that. And I go, well, we need to make sure that they do. And then my wife says, would we want them to know that we loved each other and that we served each other? And Eli, my youngest, goes, I ain't serving Jake. And he said, I love him, but I ain't serving him. And I go, okay, well, we'll get to that. And then I said, what about would we want them to know that we served our community and that we cared about our community? And they go, Mom does everything at school. She volunteers for everything, and you coach all of the teams. They know that. I go, okay. And then I was getting ready to say the fourth one, and Jake goes, hey, Dad, you know how You always tell us that we need to be men of our word. I think that would be important. How about we just, we want them to say that we were honest, and that we were dependable, that you could count on us. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was better than the one that I had. And so we go back home and we get some paper and we draw like a square and like a roof, and we wrote the Pittman way. Underneath it, the way we do it at our place. And we wrote those 4 things on the corner, on each corner, the cornerstones. And we put it up everywhere. We put it on the refrigerator, put it on everybody's bathroom window, mirror. We put it in the living room so that we could consistently communicate the culture. And as we started trying to live by this Pittman way, it was really great because when you mess up, we could always say, hey, is that the way we do it at our place? No, I'm sorry. And that was me talking, right? Okay? Because they will call you out on it. But that was the system of accountability. And I was thinking about it as we went along, and it was really cool kind of how the change had happened. But I started thinking that, this was more than just for here and now. This was more than just for until they got out of the house. It was for generations. This was really a generational principle. And that really became clear to us one night. Lane and I were in the living room watching TV or something, and the boys were in their playroom, and we had this little mini basketball goal that we thought was a really great idea when we first got it, and they put it in their playroom. Man, they spent hours in there, and they were throwing this little rubber ball against the wall, and when they got to where they could dunk it, and we'd hear that sound. I can still hear that sound in my head, them dunking the ball, and as usually happened, those games ended with both of them running into the living room crying. And so, I don't know, maybe I was tired that night or something, but I kind of blew up at them. They're like, oh, first team dad. I said, I didn't write the book because I was one. I wrote the book because I want to be one. So I send them to their rooms, and I tell them, you can't go to that party on Saturday. Oh, that's so unfair. Well, after they cooled down and after we cooled down, we brought them in. We started talking to them, and we said, look, guys, there's some things that y'all need to know. And these are things that we can guarantee you. Number one, I said, I'm going to make mistakes. You're going to do something, and I'm going to be maybe too hard on you when I shouldn't be. Or maybe I should be harder on you, and I'm not. I'm going to make mistakes. You can take that to the bank. I said, secondly, everything that I do when it comes to you guys, I do because I love you. And if you got young kids, use that one because they can't argue with it. They would do something, I'd discipline, they'd go, but Dad, they go, I know, it's because you love me. And I said, the third thing, and maybe the most important thing, is the way you guys parent your kids is going to be influenced about 95% by how I parent you. So I take this extremely seriously. We're not just flying by the seat of our pants, hoping we can just get you out of the house alive. I said, this is serious to me, and it's serious to your mom, because you're going to parent your kids that way, my grandkids, and then guess what they're going to do? They're going to parent their kids that way, your grandkids. I said, so this is important. And it was then that I started thinking about that generational principle and really what it is legacy. And the last chapter in my book, I saved to the end for a reason, and it's about legacy. And I grew up in Dallas, Richardson, a suburb of Dallas, and my dad started taking me to Cowboy games when I was 8 years old in the Cotton Bowl. And then when they moved to Texas Stadium, we kept going and went to every game, and I loved the Cowboys. Now, the players came and went, but there was one figure that was consistent. It was Tom Landry. And Coach Landry, the guy in the hat, I really looked up to him because he always seemed to be in control. And he had this quiet strength. And Tony Dungy, who's a good friend of mine and wrote the foreword for my book, had that same thing. So if you didn't know Coach Landry, you probably know Coach Dungy. And I loved Coach Landry. And we all know the story. Jerry Jones comes in and pushes Coach Landry out. And, he maintained his character and his integrity. He didn't get in the paper. He didn't get on his Twitter at the hat, hashtag Jerry sucks. He maintained his character. And I respected him even more after that. And of course, I was older. But Jerry finally did something really great for Coach Landry, and he had a statue made. And he was going to put it out in front of the stadium. They were at Texas Stadium still. And the day they were dedicating the statue at halftime of a game, they had the statue in the end zone, big statue on a pedestal, and they pulled it out to the middle of the big blue star. And they had Brad Sham, the longtime voice of the Cowboys, out there with Alicia, Tom's widow now. And Brad Sham says, "Alicia, what do you think?" And she looked up. She goes, "I remember him being bigger." And I thought about that, and I was like, isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we should strive for our family, to remember us as being bigger? She didn't think that because he won Super Bowls or was in the Hall of Fame. She thought that because of how he was in his home and the job that he had done with their kids and the husband that he was to her. So you don't have to be a Hall of Fame coach. All you have to do is be intentional. Figure out, ask God to tell you what to do. I've got 31 principles in my book. There's probably 130,000 more. And I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. If we'll be intentional and if we'll ask God to guide us, then we can be that legacy dad and that legacy husband.